I think you all know by now that I love WCW, and I probably give the company a bit more leeway than others on YouTube and what have you, but I'd be lying if I said WCW didn't deserve a lot of the criticism they received both during their active years and after. The WCW Nitro show was at one point the place to see great action, high caliber superstars and unpredictable moments play out each and every week, but as time went on, WCW seemed to run out of ideas, or the ideas they thought would be great turned out to be absolutely terrible. Today, I want to look at some of the more absurd and ridiculous stuff WCW put on their flagship Monday Night TV show, and this will include matches, promos, and backstage shenanigans. It's not necessarily a worst of WCW Nitro video, but an overview of silly stuff that just didn't work. Stuff that lives on in infamy for how absurd it was. And I'm intentionally leaving out the finger poke of doom because I'm sick of talking about it. I've 15 moments for you in total, and yes, there could have been a whole lot more just by picking random matches and moments from Nitro in 2000, but I've went with moments that resonated most with me for all the wrong reasons. We begin by going all the way back to October 1995 for one of the show's most bizarre cliffhangers, so let's get underway. Early episodes of Nitro mainly centered around Hulkamania running wild and Hogan, alongside Macho Man Randy Savage and Sting, having issues with the Dungeon of Doom and the Four Horsemen. Hogan had a monumental task ahead of him at Halloween Havoc 95. He was going to compete in a sumo monster truck match against the Giant. He was then going to defend his WCW Championship against the big man in the main event. And if this wasn't enough, the Taskmaster and the Master said they had a big surprise for Hogan at the pay-per-view. A surprise that was frozen in a giant block of ice. How Sullivan and the Master carried this giant block of ice to Nitro, I have no idea, but fans eagerly awaited the reveal as the giant block sat on the Nitro stage throughout the entire broadcast. Well, at the very end of Nitro, the ice exploded. It didn't melt, it exploded. And for mere seconds before Nitro faded out for the week, fans saw this. This right here was WCW's final Hail Mary in regards to selling more pay-per-view buys before Halloween Havoc. Is it a monster? A mummy? Maybe a wrestler from Hogan's past concealing his identity? Who knows, but I can't imagine anyone rushing out to buy the pay-per-view based on this cliffhanger. If anything, it would make people say, nah, I'm not watching that shit. Turns out it was the Yeti, and the Yeti seriously wanted to hump Hulk Hogan. So there you go. This won't be the only time Ric Flair makes an appearance in this video, but Rick got sent to a mental hospital because, get this, he was doing a bad job running WCW. Commissioner Roddy Piper went to an extreme level by getting David Flair to sign some papers, and the next thing you know, Rick's in a mental health facility completely embracing his perceived craziness. If you look at the Nature Boy during the 80s and even into the mid to early 90s, the guy was all about styling, profiling, and being wrestling's creme de la creme. And then you look at what he had become in 1999 WCW. Yeah, you do notice a stark contrast, don't you? Sure, Rick did lose it during promos and he had a crazy look in his eyes whenever he got ultra passionate, but having him sing, dance, and run around in his underwear while effectively being forced into a mental institute seemed like a really bad joke. But it happened, and to me, it wasn't very funny. I know others disagree, but try watching the entire Ric Flair presidency run in WCW from start to end, and try wrapping your head around this being one of the final chapters of that run. We all know WCW wasn't great at finishing up storylines, but throw him in a mental asylum is a pretty bad one. Dustin Rhodes made an impact when he left WCW in 1995 to join the WWF and to become Goldust, a controversial character that everyone had strong opinions on one way or another. When Dustin was ready to come back to WCW, he did so during a time when management was all over the place, and the idea the creative committee had for Dustin was for him to portray a weird supernatural character named Seven. Vignettes aired that showed Seven tormenting a young boy, something that gets joked about quite frequently for obvious reasons. But in the middle of these vignettes airing, Vince Russo was finishing up his paperwork and Russo was getting ready to make some serious changes to WCW programming. When Seven was ready to make his TV debut, Russo decided that the character should actually get totally scrapped. So he had Dustin float down to the ring to cut a work shoot promo where he mocked the gimmick. Dustin said WCW were trying to dress him up like Uncle Fester. The 7 characters sucked just as much as Goldust did in the WWF, according to Dustin. After saying he wouldn't let the WCW higher-ups embarrass him with such a ridiculous gimmick, Dustin announced he wouldn't be seen again with the 7 character, and the idea was thrown in the bin. Hulk Hogan had superpowers that allowed him to stop wars in America, destroy stinky giants, and chop mountains down with the edge of his hand. But did you know he also had the power of supervision? Like, he could see things from really far away that us normal plebs just couldn't see. Well, this power was demonstrated on Nitro, and Hulk was cutting a promo with Mean Gene Okerlund. This particular Nitro took place in San Padre Island during spring break. There were hotels and buildings surrounding the beach, and when the wall showed up on one of those buildings, Hogan was able to identify him even though he looked like a little speck on our screens. He looked like a little pixel. Hogan shouted, "That's the wall, brother," twice, just so everyone knew that it was indeed the wall up there.
That's the wall up there, brother!
And hey, we could actually explain this by saying Hogan knew the Wall's theme music, which did play during his appearance, but the probability of Hulk knowing what generic Rock Track 26 from the Turner Audio Library actually sounded like is pretty low. Hogan wrestled the Wall, brother, later in the night, and Hogan's enemy got put through a table. Vampiro had to help Hulk because the Wall was just way too much for old wood from the hood. To be fair, this was the last live Nitro that aired before the big WCW reboot, so I guess they just didn't care at this point. Just sticking with Hogan for a moment, the Hulkster toyed with turning to the dark side months before forming the NWO. Dark Side Hulk Hogan was a weird experiment where Hogan decided to fight fire with fire, and in order to take down the Dungeon of Doom, Hulk felt he had to get a little evil and a little twisted. While Dark Side Hogan is pretty interesting in terms of seeing Hulk try something new, the actual execution of said gimmick change was pretty terrible. Hogan had real difficulties letting go of his own mannerisms, and this led to Dark Side Hogan coming off as a bit cheesy and a bit corny. On top of this, it felt like Hulk didn't fully embrace the whole idea in fear of losing his top babyface billing, so what we're left with is a confusing and weird time period from Hulk's career. Speaking of weird and confusing, one particular promo from Dark Side Hogan saw Hulk wearing a cloak, a mask, and wielding a giant sword around while talking about the stench of the Dungeon of Doom and Macho Man bringing Ming's head to him on a silver platter. It's downright bizarre. I guess Hogan had some time in the TBS prop department. He found this outfit lying around and he said, "Brother, I've got a great idea." Though the idea wasn't great at all, and eventually Hulk would end up ditching the gimmick while taking shots at the Wrestling Observer newsletter. A totally valid reason to return from the dark side. Celebrities in wrestling's absolutely nothing new, but when that celebrity's actually an in-character puppet who isn't Kermit the Frog, then we've got a problem on our hands. The Child's Play movies were awesome back in the day, but does that really mean Chucky had to show up on Nitro to cut a promo on Rick Steiner? Chucky could be heard laughing in arenas for a few weeks leading up to this, and then the reveal happened on the October 12th, 1998 episode of Nitro. Chucky appeared on the screen while Rick Steiner was getting interviewed by Mean Gene, and Chucky called Rick an idiot. He said Rick has played with dolls all his life, according to his mom. He then promoted The Bride of Chucky while telling the dog-faced gremlin not to mess with his brother Scott, and the crowd reaction through all this was mixed. You could hear people booing when the movie got promoted. Turns out Chucky's actually a huge wrestling fan. He also made appearances at NXT's Halloween Havoc shows in 2021 and 2022 to promote his new show, so I guess he's consistent if nothing else. Oh boy, yeah, if you watch this one as it happened, there's a high chance you turned over to WWF Raw because it took so freaking long. To test the waters and see how an episode of Nitro would fare with NWO Brandon, Eric Bischoff decided to dedicate the second half of his December 22nd, 1997 broadcast to the New World Order. This was a legitimate experiment, seeing as an early idea was to change Nitro to an exclusive NWO show once Thunder got underway a few weeks later, but the execution of this one was handled really badly. Over 12 minutes were spent rearranging the furniture as the NWO members ordered the ring crew and production staff to make changes, and while this doesn't seem very long and it sounds like something that could actually be cool to witness, it felt like an absolute eternity, and it all happened to the sound of dead air. The takeover seemed like it was never going to end, and it makes you wonder why the babyfaces of WCW didn't come out to stop it. It doesn't end here though. Hulk Hogan received a few gifts on this evening, and one of those gifts was a custom motorbike. Turns out one of the crew guys grabbed the wrong chopper and he realised his mistake after driving down the ramp, so he headed back up and he got the correct bike moments later. 2 bikes for Hollywood Hogan. Hogan also received his own head as a present. This one came from Sting, and while this wasn't a terrible idea on paper, the way Hogan hammed it up was absolutely atrocious. NWO Nitro was deemed a failure. It was a bad go-home show for WCW's highly anticipated Starrcade 97 event. Nitro stayed under the WCW banner thanks to Larry Zbyszko beating Eric Bischoff at the pay-per-view, and New World Order show takeovers didn't happen again. Ric Flair pretended to have a heart attack after cutting a promo live on Nitro. Once he got done speaking with Mean Gene Okerlund, the Nature Boy went to the corner and he fell down, and it was all made to look very serious as EMTs, officials, Dusty Rhodes and Rick's best friend Arn Anderson rushed down to see if Rick was okay. The commentators talked about how this wasn't part of the show and people had real concern for Rick as this all played out, and later on Eric Bischoff came out of character to wish Rick all the best. Bischoff and Rick were scheduled to face each other at Starrcade 98, but it looked like all that was thrown out the window, seeing as something very serious just happened on live TV. On the next episode of Thunder, the Flair family showed up. Bischoff attacked David while Brian Adams took care of the 10-year-old Reed Flair. Bischoff also gave Rick's wife a smooch before Thunder went off the air, so fans knew at this moment it was all a storyline. Rick's doctor then announced that Flair was actually poisoned. Bischoff was blamed, but he denied it. The whole thing was then dropped, seeing as we're now in attempted murder territory, and all was forgotten about as Flair returned to TV exactly 1 week later. Just staying within this storyline for another moment, Ric Flair became president of WCW and he wanted to make life difficult for Bischoff. He offered Eric a match. If Bischoff could beat the Nature Boy, Flair would shave his head and Rick would also give up his presidency. Bischoff could run WCW once again and all he had to do was beat the Nature Boy. David Flair showed up. Flair Jr. announced that he actually wanted a piece of Bischoff and the young Nature Boy wanted to take his dad's place in the match. And while Eric wasn't keen on fighting Rick, he was more than willing to take on the inexperienced David live on Nitro. Rick sweetened the deal though. If Eric was going to fight David, then Eric had to give up something too. So if David won this upcoming match, then Eric would have to, and I quote, shave his head and his ass. David Flair versus Eric Bischoff then took place and this bout was hilariously bad. Eric was not a good performer, but he could get by with an experienced opponent. David had very little experience at this point in his career, and so what we had here was a comical bout that gives us a prime example of the blind leading the blind. It was 2 cheeks of the same shitty ass. David looked incredibly awkward, incredibly nervous, and it was almost like his mind went totally blank at times. Bischoff was in no position to lead a match or steer the ship on these choppy waters, so he just kinda rolled with how bad it was. In the end, David won with a pathetic punch while holding a roll of quarters, and Bischoff got his head shaved after the 1, 2, 3. At one point, I called this the worst match in Nitro history, and I almost split my sides while laughing at this abomination. But then, a match came along to top this one, and that match was... Tagras vs Major Guns vs Paisley from the 28th of August 2000. Here again we get a good example of what happens when inexperienced performers get in the ring. This one was booked as a triple threat match, no one knew what was going on, and so the match ended after just 30 seconds of sheer unbridled confusion. Paisley kicks Major Guns in the back, the Major then takes a forearm to the neck from Tagras. Tagras performs a jackknife cover, and instead of kicking out, the Major tries to punch Tagras. The referee counts to 3, even though the match wasn't supposed to end here. The bell rings, and the competitors get back to their feet to try and continue the match. The girls are told to stop fighting. They stand there looking at each other while waiting to get further orders from the back. Paisley ends up coming in to help Tigress lay a beatdown into the fallen Major Guns. And then I think Paisley was supposed to reject a high five from Tigress, but this too looked really awkward. The match was, yeah, whatever. It's WCW in 2000, so that should be all the explanation we really need. It's a classic and it's been talked about a lot, but I had to include it here. It's so absurd and so nonsensical that it becomes funny. It definitely deserves its place in infamy. The Warrior showed up in WCW. He cut a crazy long promo upon his debut, but that's not what I want to mention here. What I do want to talk about is when he started playing supernatural mind games with Hollywood Hogan, and one of these mind games featured Hogan seeing Warrior in his locker room. To be precise, in his mirror. Now, supernatural spooky shit's nothing new in wrestling, and I'm not saying that logic has to strictly apply when presenting something out of the ordinary, but Hogan could see Warrior in the mirror, we could see Warrior, the commentators could see Warrior. However, Eric Bischoff could not see Warrior. Of course, WCW are trying to show Hogan losing his marbles and seeing things that aren't really there, but the fact that everyone else could see Warrior but Eric Bischoff kinda makes us conclude that it's Eric who's going crazy and not Hollywood. Again, it's nitpicking to a degree, and logic needn't apply when dealing with the supernatural, but it is still kinda dumb when you think about it. No worries though, because Hogan would beat Warrior at Halloween Havoc 98 while giving us one of the worst matches of the year, so thank you very much, boys. The idea of having a bunch of Mexican wrestlers fighting over a pinata is enough to make people raise eyebrows, and if you don't believe me, just look it up for yourself. There's also the fact that, in kayfabe, the match was booked because the luchadors complained about being underpaid, and so Vince Russo put a check inside a pinata for 10 grand. So it's not like all the luchadors were going to receive fair pay, only the one who can beat up the pinata hanging from a pole inside the ring would get rewarded. Then you've got Ed Ferrara showing up as Oklahoma for the first time ever during this match, so that's more bullshit added to the bout. Ferrara made fun of Jim Ross and Ross's Bell's palsy while calling the match beside a returning Dr. Death, Steve Williams. I'm sure Williams thought he walked into a real goldmine with this one. In default, this wasn't bad enough. If this giant shit cocktail didn't need any more nonsense, the pinata wouldn't stay in place and it fell from the pole very early into the match. Not only that, Steve Williams took the check for himself. It's legitimately difficult to find anything good about this match. There's been much said about this storyline, and Eric Bischoff stated it's one of the regrets he had from a creative standpoint while working in WCW. But basically, Scott Hall started drinking on live TV and the pay-per-views, which mirrored his real-life problems going on at the time. Scott had been suspended on more than one occasion in WCW, and fans knew it had to do with problems with alcohol. So while on this mission to blend reality with fiction, it was decided that Scott would start drinking on TV, and he had come out for his matches in bad shape. It should be noted that apparently Scott played this all up for the cameras, and it's believed that Scott didn't touch a single drink while the cameras were rolling for this angle, but that's something we can't verify either. You'd like to think that he remained sober while performing actual matches in the ring, but yeah, let's leave it up for debate. To show how bad things had gotten, members of both NWO Black and White and NWO Wolfpack came out to confront Scott. This is notable because these two factions didn't get along at all, but now when I think about it, if the finger poke of doom was a long-term plan between Nash and Hogan, then I guess it makes sense for Nash to come out and check on his buddy. But anyway, Scott was in a you won't tell me what to do kind of mood, and in the midst of this confrontation he threw up all over Eric Bischoff. Absolutely gross and terribly sad at the same time. I can't imagine many wrestling fans tuning into their favourite show wanting to see men puking all over other men, but hey, it's a gimmick the WWF tried to run with too. Sticking with the outsiders for a moment, Big Sexy Kevin Nash opposed Vince Russo's New Blood as part of the Millionaires Club. The big man was getting ready to face Jeff Jarrett at the 2000 Great American Bash, and on the Nitro before the pay-per-view, Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo wanted to stack the deck against Big Sexy by having him face 12 members of the New Blood in a gauntlet match. No members of the Millionaires Club were allowed to help Kevin, and if Nash lost, he would also lose his opportunity to face Jarrett at the pay-per-view. Now, you know and I know how gauntlet matches work. One guy, usually usually a babyface, faces a ton of other guys in a string of one-on-one matches. If the babyface beats someone, then the next heel comes into the ring and the babyface can only win the match once he successfully ran the gauntlet. Well, count on WCW to completely mess it up, because what we get here is not only the fundamentals of a gauntlet match getting changed, but the fundamentals of pro wrestling itself also getting altered. Disco Inferno's the first man to get pinned. This happens in seconds. Chris Candido then comes in to take a big boot and a jackknife from Nash while Johnny the Bull enters the ring. The referee then sees Candido's shoulders on the mat and he counts 1, 2, 3 without Nash attempting to pin Chris. So yes, Candido was eliminated without actually getting covered. The same happens to Johnny the Bull and Big Vito. Nash must have liked Rey Mysterio, seeing as he gets graced with a cocky pin. So yeah, what the hell are we doing here, guys? Eventually, Nash gets attacked by all remaining New Blood members, so the gauntlet aspect's been completely tossed out the window. Goldberg runs down for the save, and I guess the match got thrown out or something. Nash didn't get pinned and he never submitted, so the Jarrett match went ahead as scheduled, though Bischoff did say he was going to suspend Goldberg for getting involved. This would all lead to the Goldberg heel turn, which is another story altogether, but yeah, go back and check out this main event gauntlet match and ponder over how absurd it was. Maybe Nitro was running out of time, maybe no one cared. Whatever the case, it wasn't good. I've talked about this one extensively in the past, and I recommend you check out the blunder video I made about Uncensored 97 if you want the full story. But basically, Nitro came to a screeching halt while Roddy Piper fought a bunch of nobodies in a series of work-shoot matches, including Luther Reigns, a random stuntman, and Piper's buddy that he's been seen with a few times on WCW television. Piper wanted to form a team to take on the New World Order and WCW at an upcoming pay-per-view. He decided to let a bunch of jabronis try to gain access by fighting the Hot Rod in the ring. This went on for way too long, but hey, at least John Tenta got accepted into Piper's squad, right? Well, no. The whole thing got ripped apart so badly that Piper's team got dismantled the very next week on Nitro, and instead they were replaced by members of the Four Horsemen, so it was all a complete and total waste of time. Whoever thought having Piper go up against nobodies, except for John Tenta, on wrestling's hottest TV show must have been sniffing copious amounts of glue. This was pretty bad, and it ranks up there as one of Nitro's worst ever segments. As stated, I could have named many more moments from Nitro's history that would easily fit into this video, but this is where you come in. This is where you add your comments while saying, I can't believe you didn't mention this moment or that moment, so have at it, soldier. To restore balance and bring world peace, I will put together a video looking at my favourite Nitro moments of all time, so look out for that one soon. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and please take care.